The small town of Abbeville lay basked in the golden glow of an autumn afternoon. The streets were quiet, the slow hum of daily life rolling by at an easy pace. In the corner of a local diner, two men sat finishing their meals, the remnants of their conversation weaving between bites of food and the occasional sip of coffee. LC, a pseudonym derived from his initials, and Charlie had spent the morning handling business, their discussions centered on insurance work and the usual dealings of their trade. The meal had been a welcome break, a moment to unwind before the drive north toward Lafayette. The date was October 20th, 1969, a day like any other, or so they thought. Stepping out onto the streets, they felt unusually still as they made their way to the car, not empty, not lifeless, just subdued, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Charlie unlocked the door with a flick of his wrist, the hinges creaking slightly as LC slid into the passenger seat. The familiar scent of old leather filled the space. LC reached for the radio, his fingers hovering over the dial before deciding against it. He wasn't sure why. A strange feeling had settled over him, one he couldn't quite name. Not fear, not anxiety, just something. Charlie turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. The car sat idle for a moment, the vibration of the motor sending a soft hum through the seats. LC let out a loud sigh, shaking off the creeping unease. It was just another drive, just another stretch of road, nothing to worry about. The tires rolled forward, the diner shrinking away in the rearview mirror. The town of Abbeville faded behind them, swallowed by the winding path of Highway 167. But they had no way of knowing that they had just crossed an invisible threshold. What lay ahead was not just miles of open road, but something far stranger, something waiting for them in the distance, something that would leave them questioning whether they had just glimpsed a past long buried in the folds of history. The Louisiana countryside seemed almost unnaturally still as they cruised north along the highway. Their car windows were rolled down, the cool air drifting in as they spoke casually about work, the hum of the engine cutting through the silence of an otherwise empty road. The drive had been routine, until, some distance ahead, a vehicle appeared, moving unnaturally slow, a shape out of place against the modern highway. As they drew closer, the car became clearer. A turtleback-style automobile, in pristine condition, its chrome gleaming in the midday sun. The type of car that belonged in a museum, not rolling along a 1969 highway. As they approached, LC felt a strange sense of dissonance creep into his mind. The world around them felt off. Something wasn't right. The slow-moving vehicle seemed frozen in time, untouched by the decades that had passed since such models were common. As LC and Charlie inched closer, a detail stood out with startling clarity. A large, bright orange license plate fixed to the back, the numbers stamped upon it unmistakable. They exchanged glances, confusion knitting their brows. That plate. There was no way it could be legal. Perhaps it was an antique vehicle, part of some parade or exhibition. But there were no events scheduled. And if it was simply a restored classic, why did everything about it, the tires, the paint, the pristine glass, look as though it had just rolled off the production line? They slowed their car, creeping alongside the bizarre anachronism. LC, sitting in the passenger seat, turned his gaze to the driver of the old car. It was a lady. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face framed by soft curls tucked beneath an elegant hat adorned with a long coloured feather. She wore a luxurious fur coat, the kind of outfit that belonged in a Hollywood film from decades prior, but it was 1969 and her attire was wildly out of place. Beside her, standing on the seat, was a child, perhaps a little girl, though it was difficult to tell beneath the heavy coat and cap that obscured their features. The child clung to the woman's arm, small gloved hands gripping tightly as though seeking comfort. Something struck LC as odd. Their windows were rolled up. Every other driver on the road, including LC and Charlie, had their windows open. The fresh air of the autumn afternoon was perfectly pleasant. But inside that car, the woman and child were sealed away, as if locked in their own separate reality. He leaned slightly out of his window, calling to the woman, "Do you need help?" Her reaction was immediate and deeply unsettling. Her face contorted into an expression of panic, her wide eyes darting back and forth as though searching for something, anything that made sense. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her hands tightened on the wheel, her knuckles white. The child turned its head toward them, its features half obscured by shadow. A cold sensation, deeper than mere temperature, crept up LC's spine. The woman's terror was palpable. She looked down at their car, eyes brimming with confusion. Her reaction was not one of recognition, not relief at seeing potential help, but something else, something much worse. It was as if she were looking at something impossible, as if she were staring at a vision from another world. LC frantically gestured for her to pull over, mouthing the words when it became apparent she couldn't hear him. She hesitated, then, slowly, she began to veer toward the side of the road. Relief flooded LC. He and Charlie drove past her, preparing to park ahead so they could properly assist. Then, she was gone. The road behind them was empty. The old car was no longer there, the passengers nowhere in sight. It was as if they had never been there at all. A new car pulled onto the shoulder behind them, its driver leaping out and running toward LC and Charlie. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What happened?" the man demanded. "Where did they go?" The newcomer, a traveler from out of state, had been behind the vintage car. He had seen everything. He had watched as the strange old vehicle began to pull over, and then simply ceased to exist. For an hour, the three men searched the stretch of highway, scouring the area for some sign of the vanished automobile. But there was nothing. No tire marks, no side roads, no place the car could have turned. It was as if it had been swallowed whole by the very fabric of reality. The third man insisted on reporting the event to the police, convinced they had witnessed a missing persons case. But LC and Charlie refused. What could they possibly say? That they had seen a woman and child in a car from 1940, that it had begun pulling over and then simply vanished. Without their cooperation, the third man finally decided not to report it on his own, although before leaving, they did exchange addresses and phone numbers. LC and Charlie climbed back into their car, silent, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had just experienced. The key turned in the ignition again, the familiar rumble of the engine breaking the eerie stillness. They pulled back onto Highway 167, the miles passing beneath their tires, each one pulling them further from the place where reality had twisted, where something, for a moment, had slipped through the cracks of time. And yet, no matter how far they drove, the unease remained. Throughout history, tales of time slips have often centered around people, individuals who seemingly step out of their own era and into another, if only for a fleeting moment. But sometimes, it isn't a person that drifts between timelines. Sometimes, it's something much larger. An entire house appearing where it shouldn't be, before vanishing into the void once more. One of the most perplexing cases of a time slip in England is not of a traveller lost in time, but of a grand Georgian-style house that has been witnessed by many, only to disappear without a trace. The year was 1926. It was a crisp October afternoon when Miss Ruth Wynne, a young schoolteacher, decided to take a walk with one of her students through the quiet countryside of Ruam Green, Suffolk. The path they followed wound through patches of woodland, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet as a light breeze rustled through the trees. All of a sudden, the air grew unnaturally still. The sounds of the birds, the rustling of the leaves, the distant hum of village life, all fell into an eerie silence. A cold chill swept over them, an inexplicable shift in the atmosphere that sent shivers down their spines. And then they saw it. Before them stood a massive estate, a grand Georgian house of red brick, its windows glinting in the pale afternoon light. A high boundary wall stretched around the property, its bricks tinged yellow and green with age. The iron gates at its entrance loomed tall, their intricate designs hinting at wealth and status. It was a sight neither of them had ever seen before, yet it stood there, imposing and real. Curious, they stepped closer. The house was perfectly preserved, its gardens lush and vibrant as though frozen in time. The long driveway leading to the front door was immaculate, untouched by time or decay. Yet something about it felt wrong. The silence deepened, pressing in on them from all sides. The cold intensified. Miss Wynne turned to her pupil, their wide eyes reflecting her own unease. A moment ago, this place had not been here, and yet it stood before them, solid and undeniable. They exchanged nervous glances, but dared not move forward. Instead, they turned back the way they came, hurrying home with an unsettling sense that they had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. That evening, still troubled by what they had witnessed, Miss Wynne inquired about the estate, describing it in intricate detail to the locals. But they all gave her the same response. There was no such house. Nothing of its description had ever stood in the area. No grand Georgian mansion, no sprawling gardens, no iron gates, only overgrown brambles, ancient ponds, and remnants of a past, long forgotten. Determined to make sense of what she had seen, Miss Wynne returned to the site the next day. But the landscape had changed. The house was gone. Only wild undergrowth and tangled ivy remained. Not a single trace of the grand estate remained, except in her memory. Years later, in 1934, she documented her experience, still perplexed by what she and her student had encountered that fateful autumn day. Had they witnessed a glimpse of the past? A fracture in time, revealing a long-lost home that once stood there? Or had they stepped into something else entirely, an echo of a forgotten reality, seeping through the cracks of time? Even now, nearly a century later, the house continues to appear and disappear at random, seen by different witnesses across the decades. It remains one of England's most enduring paranormal mysteries, a reminder that time might not always be as stable as we believe. While many time-slip phenomena involve solitary figures encountering remnants of the past, there are instances where entire groups or events from bygone eras manifest before unsuspecting witnesses. One such compelling account is the appearance of a phantom army in Havah Park, Yorkshire, in the early 19th century. On the evening of June 28, 1812, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the undulating fields of Havah Park near Ripley. Two farmers, Anthony Jackson and young Martin Turner were tending to their cattle. The air was thick with the scent of earth and the gentle buzz of evening insects. Suddenly, the tranquil ambience was disrupted when Turner exclaimed, "What a quantity of beasts!" Jackson's gaze followed Turner's outstretched finger, but instead of livestock, his eyes widened in astonishment. "Lord bless us! They are not beasts, they are men," he replied, his voice tinged with disbelief. Before them, atop the crest of a nearby hill, an assembly of soldiers materialized, their white uniforms gleaming in the waning sunlight. Leading them was a commanding figure adorned in a striking scarlet tunic. The spectral battalion moved with synchronized precision, their formations fluid and purposeful. As they descended the slope, a second contingent, clad in dark attire, emerged, positioning themselves in an L-shaped formation relative to the first. Despite the potential for confrontation, an eerie camaraderie seemed to bind the two groups as they marched in unison, passing merely 100 yards from the bewildered onlookers. The atmosphere grew dense, an almost tangible tension pressing upon Jackson and Turner. The metallic clink of phantom weapons and the rhythmic cadence of unseen drums resonated through the air. As the last ranks vanished over the hill's ridge, a thick, unnatural mist enveloped the landscape, its opacity so profound that it obscured the nearby cattle for several minutes. When the haze finally dissipated, the hillside stood empty, devoid of any trace of the mysterious procession. This enigmatic spectacle, witnessed by two humble farmers, has since become a cornerstone of Yorkshire folklore, inviting speculation and wonder about the boundaries of time and reality. Transitioning from the spectral battalions of Havah Park, we return to the haunting events on Louisiana's Highway 167. This incident has sparked numerous theories attempting to decipher its mystery. There's the time slip theory, where the individuals involved may have inadvertently traversed a rift in time, momentarily intersecting with an era from the past. Critics argue that such experiences could result from psychological factors, such as hallucinations or misinterpretations of sensory information, possibly influenced by fatigue or environmental factors. But the presence of multiple witnesses, including an independent third party who corroborated the event, challenges the notion of a shared hallucination. The consistency in their accounts adds weight to the argument against a purely psychological explanation. Then there's the parallel universe theory, where the event might represent a brief convergence between our reality and a parallel universe, allowing a glimpse into an alternate timeline. The concept of parallel universes remains speculative, with no empirical evidence to support such interactions. Skeptics might attribute the experience to more mundane explanations, such as misperception or a hoax. But, while the multiverse theory is unproven, it remains a topic of serious discussion in theoretical physics. The detailed and consistent nature of the witnesses' descriptions provides a compelling case that invites further exploration beyond conventional explanations. A more creepy theory suggests a residual haunting. The apparition of the vintage car and its occupants could be a ghostly spectre where past events imprint upon the environment and replay under certain conditions. Cynics might suggest that the witnesses encountered a vintage car participating in a historical reenactment, and that their minds filled in details to fit a ghostly narrative. Yet, this was an open highway with no side roads. The sudden disappearance of the car, especially in full view of multiple witnesses, defies the explanation of a physical vehicle simply leaving the scene unnoticed. And lastly, some believe that the woman driving the vintage car may have been an accidental time traveler. She may have inadvertently traveled forward from the 1940s to 1969, resulting in her visible distress as she found herself in an unfamiliar era. Others might argue that this scenario is highly improbable as it relies on the existence of time travel. They may suggest that the witnesses misinterpreted a vintage car enthusiast's presence or that the event was a fabricated story. But the detailed accounts from multiple witnesses, including the woman's apparent confusion and attire, challenge the notion of a simple misinterpretation or hoax. The sudden disappearance of the car and its occupants, witnessed by independent parties, adds a layer of mystery that conventional explanations struggle to address. Although this theory invites us to consider the possibility of unintentional time travel, where individuals from the past might find themselves thrust into the future, experiencing profound disorientation and fear. While such occurrences lack scientific validation, the consistency and specificity of the witnesses' testimonies in this case leave room for contemplation. In the years that followed, the third man maintained occasional contact, seeking reassurance that the bewildering event he had witnessed was not a figment of his imagination. But LC required no such reminders. Even today, travelers along that same stretch of Highway 167 report an inexplicable shift in the atmosphere, a subtle, almost imperceptible sensation, as if the past and present are intertwined, waiting to reveal themselves, again, once more.